Deirdre, thank you so much for joining us here at Empower. It's great to have you here, everybody back in person. Is it good to be sharing ideas again?
It's really a pleasure to be here, and we've had some great discussions today.
You've been talking specifically about why net zero must be inclusive, and what does this mean, and why is it so important?
So this is something we feel incredibly strongly about at 91. We're an investment management firm that was born in an emerging market. We were born 30 years ago in South Africa. We see the investment management industry as having a huge role to play in the transition because we're the providers of capital. So when you think about the need to decarbonize, capital is really the key missing link. So global climate finance last year was about $635 billion. It needs to be somewhere between 4 and 6 trillion. And if you look at that funding gap, the biggest funding gap by far is in emerging markets. However, if you look at some of the very basic carbon footprinting methodologies that are being used today to design net zero portfolios, they really pull capital out of emerging markets. So the vast majority of emissions today are coming from emerging markets. That's because those countries are later in their industrialization cycle, and 90% of emissions growth comes from emerging markets. So we really believe that if we want to invest for positive impact, it's vital that we fund the transition in those places where it's most needed and where we can have the most impact.
So how do you go about doing that, and how do you build that inclusive transition, if you like?
So effectively what you do is you follow the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement explicitly acknowledges that the pace of decarbonization will be different in different countries, and it will have to be faster in developed countries with lower economic growth that have contributed the most to carbon emissions in the past, and it will be slower in emerging markets. So when we think about decarbonizing existing portfolios, we take that into account. But more importantly, when you think about investing for net zero, investing for decarbonization, you need to think not just about reducing your exposure to those companies that aren't doing a good job and allocating to those that are doing a better job. You need to think about positively allocating to climate solutions. And you can do that across equity and fixed income, with a particular focus, again, on funding the transition where it's most needed.
In reality, what will that mean? Will it mean wholesale change in approach for some?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the fact that the correlation between carbon emissions and GDP is about 90%. So that tells you that what we need to do to get to net zero is we need to break the way the global economy works and remake it in a new form. So that requires enormous change to the way our industry works. It also requires a very different mindset. It means looking at companies not just at their financial data, but also looking at all the sustainability data and really allocating to those companies that are having a positive impact, and countries as well.
So Deirdre, where are you seeing the greatest opportunities at the moment in this space?
So it's really across a very, very diverse group of companies. So thinking specifically about the Global Environment Strategy, which I co-manage with Graham Baker, it really is such a wide group of companies. So for example, we hold a company in the US called NextEra Energy, which just reported earnings today. NextEra is the largest owner of wind and solar generation in North America. They're about twice as big as the second best in the country. And today, of course, in their earnings, their backlog grew once again by a record. So they're building more and more wind and solar every year, really driving the transition to net zero in North America, and also, of course, having a big positive impact. And for example, in China, we hold a very different company, a company called Wuxi Lead Intelligent, that makes the machines that make electric vehicle batteries. So those lithium-ion batteries that go into electric vehicles, Wuxi Lead are the leading manufacturer of those machines in the world. And really interesting, in Europe in September, almost 25% of new cars sold were electric. So we're really at a tipping point, and we believe, therefore, there will be a great need for many, many more of those batteries, and therefore more machines from Wuxi Lead Intelligent. And then we also invest in the future of food. So if we want to think about getting to net zero, we really need to change the way that we eat. We simply can't consume the same amount of beef per capita, particularly, that we do today. So in Denmark, we invest in a company called Novozymes that make the enzymes that go into those plant-based meat alternative products. So those are three very, very different companies, but they're all having a really positive impact and also all really benefiting as we start to move to decarbonize.
we're all back in the same room at this event. How good is it for you to be able to share those ideas, have a collaborative approach, if you like? And how much do you still see resistance to this area? And if so, do you get to bang the drum while you're at something like this?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing sustainable investing for 20 years, and I would say that there's been more progress in the last 18 months than in the previous 18 years. So the level of skepticism you encounter is just so much less than it used to be. It's great to have everyone back together. I think you really realize when you meet people in person how much the debate has moved on. So we've gone from thinking about whether or not we need to invest for net zero to how are we going to do it. And that's why we think this message around the just and inclusive transition, including not just one country, but every country, it is really the next stage of the debate. And I think that's going to be a big focus at the COP, at the climate conference in Glasgow that's coming up in a couple of weeks as well.
Really exciting times, Deirdre, and I can just hear the passion in your voice about it. It's lovely to hear. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to speak to you.
Absolute pleasure. So nice to talk to you.